we're learning. There's really a lot to talk about. One of the questions that came up, I believe David Olensky asked this question, and it's a very good question. He said the case where Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok, who was a kohen, who was climbing on top of coffins, even though he's a kohen, isn't there a problem of maris ayin? And I mentioned to him that, the question is, as we explained, this is a rabbinic law, because the Gemara tells us in its answer, it explains that most coffins have a cubic amma, a cubic
tefach.
How do you translate an amma? A cubic, forget the term. A cubic amma, measurement, foot and a half.
Foot and a half.
So as long as it's not biblically prohibited, it's only rabbinically prohibited, because the rabbis decreed on coffins that have that empty space, because there are some coffins that don't have it, and therefore it's rabbinically prohibited for a kohen to climb on top of a coffin. And the Gemara explained that in the case of seeing a king, it's an honor to see the Jewish king, honor for the king, or to see a non-Jewish king is considered honor for when ultimately you will see Melech HaMashiach, you'll be able to realize the great honor. So it's ultimately honor for Mashiach. Therefore, it's considered kavod habriyos, and therefore, a kohen would even be allowed to transgress this rabbinic prohibition. So the question, so my answer to David was that this is maris ayin, and the question is, does maris ayin means that you can't do things that will look wrong. They look like they're praying. Here, he's going and climbing on top of a coffin, and maybe people don't know, people might not know that, that the king is, that he's going to see a king. And therefore, this would be maris ayin. People are thinking that he's transgressing a rabbinic commandment. So it would seem that in this scenario, number one, maybe everyone knows that the king is coming to town. Possibly that was a well-known matter, and everyone was heading there. And so in that situation, it's possible that everyone knew that kohanim are allowed to, to climb on coffins in order to see, to see the king. Maybe that was could be it was it's common knowledge. But even if not, I had mentioned that, on a rabbinic prohibition, it's not so clear if there is a prohibition of maris ayin, if there's a prohibition of doing something that looks wrong. There is a very simple example brought in Shulchan Aruch about this, and that is eating meat with almond milk. If a person has almond milk and they're eating meat, so the Shulchan Aruch says that it depends. If it's a biblical law, and this is brought in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, that if it's biblically prohibited, for example, meat with milk, meat and milk is biblically prohibited. Chicken and milk is rabbinically prohibited. So if it's meat with almond milk, that's a problem, because almond milk, people will think that it looks like milk, and they'll think that you're eating milk and meat. So it's called maris ayin. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have it. What can you do to allow you to have almond milk with meat? What you could do is put little pieces of almonds or put almonds in the milk, and therefore people will know that it's almond milk. And therefore, it won't be maris ayin. Everyone's going to realize that this is not regular milk. What about chicken?
Or, excuse me, Rabbi Smith, they can also put up a sign. We are using almond milk. Do not give maris ayin.
Yes, they could. They could do that as well. Thank you, Reb Shlomo Yosef. And the other option is that the other option is not the other option. The other case of chicken with almonds, with almond milk, that's not a problem because chicken is only rabbinically prohibited. And because it's only rabbinically prohibited, therefore, we don't have to worry about what someone's going to think. Maris ayin. Now, that's what the Ramah says. However, there are commentaries that question that. They say we have sources in Talmud that show cases that are even rabbinic cases that that a person is it's prohibited to do things with even rabbinic cases when there's maris ayin. You're not allowed to cause people to think the wrong thing and think that you're doing something prohibited. And so it even applies to rabbinic cases. So the way they answer the Ramah, they explain that it's also talking about a case where it's in a private area, people don't see. It's not public. It's not a public area. So again, you're dealing with a rabbinic prohibition, and it's not being done in public. Now, normally maris ayin even applies in private. Normally, the law of let's say you're eating almond milk and meat together, that's considered maris ayin. Even in your closet, if you're sitting in your closet hiding, you would be prohibited to have meat with almond milk. Even b'chadrei chadorim, in a room inside other rooms, it's prohibited. However, when it comes to a rabbinic prohibition, then when it comes to people aren't gonna, if it's not gonna be seen, therefore there's room for leniency. Therefore, it would be permissible. Now, another example of these, example of cases where we have, on another note, the Gemara that we're talking about deals with kavod habriyos, respect human dignity. This Gemara really touches upon a very common question that people ask rabbis all the time. They're traveling, and they need to use the bathroom, and there's a non-kosher restaurant. Are you allowed to go into a non-kosher restaurant to use the bathroom? That would be a case of kavod habriyos. That would be a case of human dignity, a very common question. And I was just pulled it up online. I see one of the, I'm sure many websites have this question, but here, this shulchanaruchharav.com, he says, may one enter a non-kosher restaurant? He says, in general, it is forbidden to enter into a non-kosher restaurant because of maris ayin. Even if there are no Jews in the vicinity, meaning no one's going to see, it's in private, you normally can't go in. However, in a time of great need, such as one is very hungry or needs the bathroom, and there is no active maris ayin involved in one's eating in the restaurant, for example, there are no Jews in the vicinity who will see him eating there, and then it is permitted to eat within the restaurant, preferably in a secluded area. If, however, there are Jews around who will see him eating there, then it is forbidden to do so even in time of great need unless he informs them of the situation. So this would be like doing it in a way that there won't be maras ayin, or it's supposed to be done in private. He says, it brings on the bottom over here, the background. He brings, number one, he brings a Nigros Moshe about
Maybe it's
time of
kosher
need.
vegetables and stuff.
One may eat kosher foods in the home of a Gentile using his non-kosher vessels, obviously cold food. However, perhaps there he's referring to a private home. That doesn't really apply to a restaurant. So that's one source of eating in a non-Jew's home, something kosher. Then he brings that the Ramah discusses eating in a Gentile's home as well. And then he brings that it is forbidden to enter a non-kosher restaurant to do both maras ayin and chashad.
Rabbi,
Will think, yes.
Rabbi, let's take it another step. What about you're on a cruise and the cruise line provides you kosher food, but you are on a cruise with treif, mostly treif. You make arrangements on beforehand for kosher food. That's not prohibited, is it?
Well, so now we're jumping to the next concept, and that is that maras ayin ends when people start realizing that, like almond milk now, 1 out of every 4 people is lactose intolerant, right? So is almond milk something surprising anymore? It's not unique. It's something that many people prefer it over regular cow's milk, and became very popular. The same thing as cruises. When you're eating nowadays, like, everyone knows that an airplane has kosher TV dinners, and cruises have kosher, TV dinners or whatever, And so it would seem like the maras ayin would not necessarily apply anymore to many of these cases. So, for example, nowadays you're allowed to have your, you would be allowed to have almond milk with your hamburger. It shouldn't be a problem at all. No one's getting the wrong impression because there might be more almond milk sold than cow's milk, possibly. I mean, and now they have ice cream with, but it might be more ice cream that's part because it's less cholesterol and less, I don't know, maybe less fat. So basically, it would seem like that shouldn't be a problem. I don't know, I don't like to give halachic rulings. I'm not that type of rabbi. So obviously, you could ask a rabbi that specializes in in giving rulings. But it would seem like it's not a problem. I mean, it's not a problem on airplanes. I've never heard of anyone saying you can't eat on an airplane because they're giving you food. I mean, it's everyone knows that the airplanes have kosher TV dinners. I would assume the same thing would apply to a to such a to a cruise. Yes, David.
The rabbi that was teaching the Shulchan Aruch class said that in the olden days you had to put out something that showed you were using margarine together with meat. Nowadays, there's more margarine produced than there is butter. So, that's the norm now is margarine, not butter.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, I mean, that, sounds right. I'm not into the, the statistics of margarine versus butter, but it sounds good. Okay.
Right. Rabbi, as far as the restaurant, if you wore a cap and you didn't have a beard, you were obviously Jewish, could you then still go in?
So it seems that the whole issue, it applies always unless it's an urgent matter, which is, if it's something urgent, then it's called kavod habriyos. So kavod habriyos means that it's a human dignity, but if it's now I should also mention that we're not dealing with a rest area. If you're in a rest area and the bathroom is connected to the McDonald's, everyone knows that everyone knows that that's a rest area bathroom. It happens to be they built them with McDonald's together with the it's part of the rest areas, the McDonald's with the bathroom and so that is not called going into a non-kosher restaurant to use the bathroom and have a problem of Maris Ayin. I mean, never heard of anyone having an issue with that. But if it's if you're stopping at a restaurant that's not a rest area, that would that's what we're really dealing with. And so if you're if it's a matter of kavod habriyos, then then it's permissible. That's basically that's basically it. Now I would say that it also connects with the fact that you're going to eat the restaurant serves non-kosher. However, they serve non-kosher, biblical non-kosher. They also serve rabbinic non-kosher. Not everything in the restaurant is biblically non-kosher. Some of it is rabbinic non-kosher. So, for example, bishul akum, things that are cooked by a non-Jew, would be rabbinically non-kosher. And it would seem that maybe you can get away with the fact that it's not a typical. In other words, you have an additional leniency that it's maris ayin on rabbinic prohibitions. Maybe it's just a thought. I didn't see it brought down, but it is maybe a thought that normally we mentioned maris ayin. The main maris ayin is on biblical commandments. So it looks like you're transgressing a biblical prohibition, but then again, there's rabbinic prohibitions as well, and it's possible that there are meals in a non-kosher restaurant that would be rabbinically prohibited but not biblically prohibited. And maybe it depends on what type of. Maybe if it's a steakhouse, then it's all biblically prohibited. But maybe if it's a restaurant that's not a steak, I'm just guessing that there probably are additional leniencies as well. But the point is that maris ayin would be what we're seeing in our Gemara is in general maris ayin is overridden when you have a kavod habriyos issue, when you have an issue of respect for humanity.
Kavod habriyos.
Kavod habriyos. Yes, Yehuda.
Yeah, you got into this discussion talking about using a bathroom in the restaurant. But you never answered that. And then you got off onto the side topic of eating in a non-kosher restaurant.
Well, so, it was both. I mentioned both. There's using the bathroom, and if someone's very hungry. So it's also kavod habriyos. The person doesn't have to starve if they want to eat something kosher in a non-kosher restaurant. So, for example, they'll go there and order a fruit platter. So the thing is, normally a restaurant is a meal, so right. It looks like you're there, you ate a meal there. If someone walks in, there are leniencies in such a scenario where a person is very hungry and they're out in the, and there's no stores and they're in, on this, there's really no other option there. It's like a rest area restaurant, there's no place to stop and they're starving, and it's a 4-hour ride till the next exit. So would they be allowed to go in there for also kavod habriyos? Human dignity also applies if a person is very hungry. So It's the same thing. Using a restroom or eating something in the restaurant would be a similar law. Again, it's better not to, but it's called kavod habriyos, and things it overrides rabbinic laws such as maris ayin. Maris ayin is a rabbinic law. So that I think that more or less covers it. Obviously, nowadays it's not a big deal. You have a text, you text your rabbi, and you can ask him shilas in case something comes up. I don't want to give any blanket rulings, but the general idea is this Gemara. This is the source. It's the Gemara that we are learning.
Thank you.
And I think that more or less covers what we learned yesterday. No, well, let's see. What we also learned another Gemara yesterday, and that was that there is a mitzvah called Hashavas Aveda, and the mitzvah of returning something that's lost. And the wording of the verse is surprising because it says, don't see it and cover yourself from it and hide yourself from it. It's a little surprising. It should just say, don't, it should say, return it, don't keep it, pick it up. It uses a surprising wording, different ways of explaining it, I should say. There are different commentaries on exactly what the source, the reason why the Talmud has to, the reason why the Talmud finds it important to derive an interesting law from this, but basically it is the wording is strange in the verse, and because of that, the Gemara, yesterday I said it was a Mishnah, but I looked it up. It's not a Mishnah, it's a Brisa in Baba Metzia that says that there are times when person is not obligated to return a lost object. So even though this is a mitzvah from the Torah to return a lost object, there is a leniency sometimes, and that is, what is the leniency? The leniency is if it's below one's dignity. It's below one's dignity, which means that even if it was their own item, they would not carry it in the street. It's below their dignity. So then for someone else, they are not obligated to carry it in the street. It's below their dignity. And there's a discussion what it means. It's zakein ve'eno lefi chavoide. It says an elder and it's below their dignity. Does this mean any elder or does this mean a scholar? Often in the Talmud often explains that ein zakein ela misha kana chachma. Zakein stands for zeh kana chachma, person who has wisdom. So it could mean that it's referring to a scholar, or it could mean that it's referring to a just any elder. Now, there's also a discussion in the commentaries if a person is allowed to be machmir. Is an elder that is below their dignity, they want to be extra stringent and they want to return it. Is that a problem? Because they're sort of humiliating the honor of the Torah, or the honor that they are given. And the Torah says you vihisalamta, it could be that it's telling you you're supposed to leave it there. You're not supposed to be returning it. It's almost like a command. Vihisalamta, hide yourself from that item. Pretend you didn't see it. Don't return it. So there's a discussion in the commentary. Does that mean you really should not be returning it and go beyond the letter of the law? Or are you allowed to go beyond the letter of the law? So I'm just sharing with you that there is discussion about these matters. But the Gemara that we learned, it basically says that the idea of kavod habriyos overrides this Torah law. And that is what's surprising, because we know kavod habriyos, we just mentioned it overrides maris ayin. It overrides that's rabbinic laws. We mentioned earlier that it would override the law of a kohen who's going to contaminate himself to a rabbinic contamination. So here we're seeing that it applies even biblically. You would take kavod habriyos into consideration, and the Gemara's answer was, you really can't take into consideration kavod habriyos when it comes to a biblical law, except the Torah here says that you have to follow that here the law of kavod habriyos does take significance, meaning that what the Gemara is saying is that it's not that you can let kavod habriyos override a Torah law, except that in this case it specifically tells you that you have to take kavod habriyos into consideration, and we take that and we say that it's below your dignity, therefore you should not, you don't have to return this lost object, kavod abriya. So the Gemara asks on top of that, says, but let's learn other cases from this case. We have other cases of kavod abriyos. Let's learn them from this case of returning a lost object. We see here that it overrides a biblical law because the Torah uses the word v'hisalamta, tells you specifically that you hide yourself because of, you transgress the Torah law, so to speak, in order for kavod abriyos, for human dignity. So we should be able to compare other cases to this case and apply the same law. And the Gemara answers no, because other cases are isura, and this is mamaina. This is a monetary. Now, there are two explanations to this. One is that monetary laws are more lenient than criminal laws, than legal matters, than isurim, than prohibitions. And because monetary laws are not as strict as prohibit, so here we're talking, it's a monetary law returning someone's lost object. It would not be able to be compared to a case of shatnez, for example, because shatnez would be a case where a person is actively doing a sin of wearing this wearing this garment that has wool and linen together, and therefore it would be considered that's a law, that's a prohibition. It's not monetary, and therefore you can't compare that. Over there you want to say, well, human dignity, you got to, you're allowed to keep it out. No, we don't say human dignity. That's a prohibition of wearing shatnez. Here we're dealing with a monetary case, and monetary cases are sort of monetary cases are more lenient. What I think this means is that monetary cases have to do with human logic, meaning that it's, if this person, what would you want done? Prohibitive cases is Hashem's logic. And when it comes to Hashem, we can't take human logic it doesn't play a role, so to speak. Hashem's logic is way beyond human logic. So again, when it comes to monetary laws, there's room for leniency because it's sort of based on what you would want done, and here's human dignity. Human dignity plays a role when it comes to monetary laws. But prohibitions, it's based on Hashem. So that's my own little thought. I don't know if I should be adding that. It just sort of comes to mind. And I see David wants to argue with me. Okay, David.
Monetary laws can always be rectified. They can always be fixed because the person that did the wrong thing always can remedy the situation by giving the money back to the person who it legally belongs to.
Right. Beautiful. That was the second explanation. It's almost the second explanation that I was going to mention. There's other explanation brought in the commentaries, and that is that monetary laws are different than prohibitive laws because monetary laws are, you can be meichel, you can forgive. And isurim can't be forgiven. So because it could be forgiven, so you're mentioning that it could be corrected. It could be corrected. Let me see if they use that term. No, they use the term nitin lemachila, which I guess is the same idea, that people could forgive it, people could correct it. So ultimately, it doesn't carry the same stringency of the matters of prohibitive matters. Yes, Robert. I'm sorry, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Does that mean that things such as monetary transgressions, whatever we want to call them, are, again, they're transactional? So there's a different level of, it's cheating, okay, versus violating a specific law relative to your interaction with another individual. Does that make sense? Or is it transactional? I mean, you borrow money or whatever, you don't give it back. That's not insulting somebody, or that's not something that is of a higher level, I guess, is what I'm groping at. Whether that puts it in a different category. Does that make sense?
I don't know if I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think the simple explanation. Are you understanding David's point, or what the way I was explaining it earlier? Are you giving more explanation to my initial explanation?
I'm sort of stuck in between both of them, I guess, is what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah. So the initial explanation, I think, is you have to face reality that there's a difference between putting tefillin on, which is a obligation between you and God, and a transaction, like you're saying, between man and man, because the second explanation was man and man, you can forgive each other. There's a certain there's a way to the monetary issue could be he forgives you in case that it doesn't make sense for you to do such a thing. So he sort of okays you.
Yeah, exactly. Between you and God, what the dictates, how you should live as a Jew versus your interaction with a fellow human being.
Right. And the first explanation was they're similar explanations, but the first one was a little different. The fact is that there's a difference between law and monetary cases. It's almost it's almost like in American law. There's criminal law and civil law.
Civil law. That's exactly what it is. Civil law is less.
That would be the different. That would be
less offensive than criminal law.
Along the same lines. Now, I really want to go a little further. Does everyone have like five minutes that do you want to give another 5 minutes and we'll go a little further? Is that okay? I'd like to finish the page. Tashema coming here. We're 5 lines up from the bottom of the page, 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. We're on page 19b. Tashema, come and listen. It says in the verse, and what this means is that there's a verse that tells us about a Nazir that they're not allowed to become impure for any of their relatives. In other words, a person is a Nazir. He prohibits himself from drinking wine and going to a cemetery, what else applies to a Nazir? They don't take a haircut. They're prohibited from wine, and they don't become tamei. They don't become impure. So the law is that there is one exception. When can they go to a funeral? When there's a dead body that no one is helping, is dealing with. It's called a mace mitzvah. They are allowed to go and bury the mace mitzvah. They're allowed to go and bury a dead person that has no one to bury him. And the verse about a Nazir, it surprisingly mentions each of the relatives and says you can't go for this relative, you can't go for that relative, you can't go for your sister, you can't go for. It goes through each relative, and the Sifri, the Medrash, it explains why does the verse have to specify each of these cases. So the Gemara now is going to bring a example of why it's so important, what we need, what we learn from this, from the fact that the verse says for one sister. Tashema, come in here. It says in the verse that a Nazir is never allowed to make himself impure. And then it says that not to the father, not to the mother, not to the brother, not to the sister. So why does it say to the sister? Ma Talmud Leimer, why does it say it? We know already. He can't make himself impure. Hare, behold, if a person was going to slaughter their paschal offering, and to give a circumcision to their son. So a person's on his way to do the paschal offering, or to do a circumcision on his son, and and now he finds out that a relative passed away. So you may think, oh, his relative passed away. One might think that he should become impure because, again, we're not talking, this person is that we're dealing with. You may think that if a relative passed away, he would make himself impure. And the verse says, no, Amrit lo yatame. The verse says that the the fact is you're busy, you have a mitzvah to do, you have a mitzvah of Pesach and you have a mitzvah of Milah. You have to fulfill these mitzvahs. These are very severe mitzvahs because if a person doesn't bring the korban Pesach, it carries with it a penalty of kares, excision. If a person doesn't do a bris Milah, it also carries with it, not in all scenarios, but the mitzvah of Milah sometimes carries with it a punishment of excision. So these mitzvahs, a person might think that they should go back and make themselves impure for their relative. Amrit lo yitame. We say don't become tameh. Keep on doing your mitzvah of Pesach and your mitzvah of Milah. You should continue to do. And Yachol kashem she'ena matame lohem. You might think that the same way you don't become tameh, impure, for this relative, kach ena matame lameis mitzvah. Also, you should not become impure for a mace mitzvah, for a dead person that has no one to help them with, to help them with burial. There's a dead person is lying there, and there's no one to bury it. So you might think that you're busy doing your korban Pesach, a very serious mitzvah. Maybe you should continue and not do this burial. Talmud loymar, the verse tells you, that it says specifically, that tells you, to a person's sister, he doesn't become tameh. However, mitzvah, but he does make himself impure for a mace mitzvah, and he stops doing the paschal offering, and he stops doing the circumcision. We just turned the page that he instead of doing the paschal offering, the circumcision, he has to go and bury the dead. There's someone who's there that has no one to bury him. Now, what is that? That is a case of kavod habrios, human dignity. Again, you got big mitzvahs in front of you. Bris milah, circumcising one's son, that's a huge mitzvah. And paschal offering, these are major tenets of Judaism. But nevertheless, the mace mitzvah, human dignity, it overrides these mitzvahs. Now, that really should teach us something, that kavod habrios takes into consideration, we take human dignity into consideration. And the Gemara now answers, and the Gemara explains the question, Amai lema ein chachma. Let's say there's no wisdom, vein tvuna, there's no understanding, vein eitzah, there's no advice, leneged Hashem, opposite a mitzvah. We should say that you don't take human dignity into consideration to transgress a mitzvah. So the Gemara answers, Shani hasab d'chsiv v'la'achlisai. Over there is different in this case because it tells you to do the mace mitzvah. And specifically this case, the Torah specifically tells you got to take human dignity into consideration, but it doesn't tell you that by all mitzvahs. It only says it here. The Gemara asks, but ligmar mina, let's learn other cases from this. And the Gemara answers, no, you can't learn other cases from this because shei v'altas shiny. This case is different. This case, we're not transgressing a negative commandment. You're just not doing something positive. In this case, we take human dignity into consideration, and we don't learn other cases from this because this is a unique case of shevi al tasa. It's a positive mitzvah that we're telling you don't do the positive mitzvah. Instead, you have to take human dignity into consideration. What about if it was a negative mitzvah to transgress? A negative mitzvah that we don't know that from this, that you would take human dignity into consideration, and therefore the law would be that in all biblical laws, you would never be able to transgress them for human dignity, only if it's rabbinic, only rabbinic laws. Okay, that concludes this Gemara. At least we finally finished. And thank you for the extra time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.